Howdy guys, Bookie Laura here. It's coming towards the end of the year, which is distressing but exciting in so many different ways. I've spent a lot of this year struggling with the wrap-ups that I do and the form that they take, and I think that this month is no different, that I still feel a sense of wanting to do something different, wanting to change the way I do wrap-ups and not really knowing how to do it. So I am bringing you a December wrap-up, but it's still in the same old boring format because I haven't figured out a better way of doing it. So this month I read a total of 7 books with a grand total of 2,060 pages. This was a surprise to me because actually when I came to it I thought that I'd had a pretty bad reading month. I think I've been pretty ill over the last few days and have barely read at all, and that's how I envisioned the past being, whereas actually it wasn't as bad as that. I think I had quite a wintry TBR, which you might have seen, and I think I was quite enthused to read a lot of those. So the first book which I read this month, which was on my Kindle, was Sleepover by H.G. Bells. This was an ARC which I received. The basic premise is that basically humans lose the ability to sleep. That's it, in a nutshell. And it's the fallout of that. I am going to do a full review of it, but I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars, and basically I thought that it was a really, really interesting idea that was well sort of explored. There are a couple of moments where I wasn't that interested in it, but overall I thought it was a really interesting idea that I was really intrigued by. Then after that I read Survivors by David Long. This is a book which I'm tackling at school after the Christmas holiday, so I was keen to read it before I then taught it. That makes sense? Anyway, I thought it was a really interesting book. It's basically set in, each chapter is a different true story of surviving against all odds, and I thought that was really interesting. I thought they were really interesting stories, and it was a really good way of sort of introducing the true life stories to children, which often there's so much fiction, which is wonderful, but I think often non-fiction can be lacking in this kind of area. Does that make sense? Anyway, yeah, I gave it 4 stars. I thought that I enjoyed reading the stories. I liked the fact that they were true stories. I thought that added a different element to it, but I think the children are going to really enjoy them more so than me. After that, I read another book on my Kindle. This time I read The Snow Sister by Emma Carroll. It's a novella, it's not a full book. It was quite short and quick and easy read. I gave it 4 stars. It is very festive, has a really strong sort of good moral message, and in a lot of ways it reminded me of A Christmas Carol, but aimed at younger children. It involves, you know, a poor family set in a historical period, sort of Victorian England, dealing with issues of having no money and how Christmas is going to be terrible, but then, you know, unsurprisingly it's all wonderful because some things matter more than money. But actually, as much as I'm making it sound very cheesy, it did give me a bit of a tear in my eye when I read that bit, so it did the job. After that, I read another book on my Kindle. That was John Green's Let It Snow. It's a small selection of short stories, I guess you could say, but they're all kind of interrelated, and I really like that because I didn't know that before I read it. I read the first book and I was like, oh, this is very cute and fluffy and YA and exactly what I want to read. And then I read the second one and realised that it was interconnected, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I think I like that. I see it a lot in films, you see, where you revealed characters are interrelated and have connections between them, and I thought it was really cool, so I enjoyed that. Oh yeah, I gave it 4 stars too. It was exactly what I needed at that time of my life. Then after that, I read The Wolf Wilder by Katherine Rundell, and I think this for me is where my reading month fell apart a bit, and I think that's to do with, you know, life in general being very busy and not having time to read. But then I think when life is like that, you need a story that's really gripping you and not something that's okay, and I think for me this was just okay. The basic story is it's about a girl whose name I don't even remember. Theodora, and she is a wolf wilder, which means that she connects with wolves and can help to train them or something, and then her life gets out of control and there's soldiers and bad guys and she has to help to beat them, and it's a lovely story, but it just felt like there wasn't enough meat to it for me. It felt kind of like the whole story was, yeah, she's going to beat the bad guys just because she can. I mean, when I reviewed this on Goodreads, I gave it 3 stars and didn't even write a review. I don't know whether that says more about my mental state at the time or my feelings about the book, but I wanted more meat to it. Like, there was nothing wrong with it, but there was nothing amazing to it either. And I had similar feelings when I read Frost Hollow Hall by Emma Carroll. This is, what does it say, set in 1881, so it's set in sort of olden days England where everyone is living in wonderful palaces, wonderful sort of stately homes, or in abject poverty. And we're introduced to Tilly, who lives in absolute poverty, and I mean, how would I summarise this book? She nearly dies in a frozen lake, but the ghost of someone saves her, and then she wants to then help him out by solving his ghostly issues, I suppose. I think if I'm honest, when I read the synopsis, I knew this wasn't going to be 100% my cup of tea. But it was okay, and actually for a lot of this book I thought this is going to get 3 stars. I am enjoying it. I never really felt that motivated to read. However, about halfway through, maybe 3/4 of the way in, I felt that the mystery, the plot thickened, and that saved it for me, and actually I gave it 4 stars in the end. So yeah, I mean, it's an okay read. I think I got through it because I liked Emma Carroll, but I think the historical thing isn't really for me. I'm okay with recent history, but as soon as you go back like 100 years, I think it loses something for me. And that's not to criticise it, that's just not my cup of tea. And then the final book which I've read this month, and there are still 2 days to go, so you never know, but the final book that I read this month was The Wizards of Once by Cressida Cowell, I think. Now this was lent to me by a girl in my class. She was bought it by her parents and regularly bought it in as she was reading it and had it on her desk. And every time I looked at the cover, I just remember saying to her, I need to read that book. When you finished it, can I read it? Because I think there's something about it. The cover is just beautiful. And that was what sold it. I had never heard anything about it, but the cover was so beautiful I knew I had to read it. And it was a surprisingly good book. It definitely felt like a children's book. There were lots of elements, I think, for me that weren't 100% my cup of tea. In particular, it has a kind of humorous tone, which doesn't appeal to me when I'm reading a book. I like them to be quite sort of factual. And it had a lot of pictures throughout, which I found quite off-putting, particularly because the characters, I thought, there was something quite sort of hideous about the way that they're drawn. And obviously that is just my opinion, but I found it quite off-putting. But actually, as I went through and I got more involved in the story and more interested in the characters, I quite liked the drawings, and it ended in a much better place than I expected. So I gave it 4 stars, and then at the end I found out that it's going to be part of a series, and I thought, yeah, I'd probably read the rest. And I think that it's probably aimed at a slightly younger audience than I would usually read, so I think this is probably aimed at sort of 8 and 9-year-olds rather than 9 and 10 and 11-year-olds, but that's cool. I think it's the kind of transitional book between young children and then young children's novels and being really funny and silly, but taking them into a more serious novel. I feel like I'm going into way deep in this book, like I'm getting it. This is the step between reading like David Walliams and Emma Carroll. This is what you want to do. I think it's a really good book. I thought it was okay, gave it 4 stars, but I think for children it combines that kind of really gripping story, really well written and exciting, but with those little elements of humour that I think children like. So whilst I do not have copies of all of them, these are some of the books which I have read this month. It's been an okay reading month, which has been good to bring a really cracking reading year to an end. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you've read in December. Is there any book that's really setting your world alight? Are you reading more because you're on holidays, or less? Which seems to be what happens to me. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.